The training deck was alive with the familiar clamor of Navy SEALs in mid-drill. Metal clanged against metal, boots slapped against the hard concrete, and the sharp bark of instructors punctuated the air. Sweat glistened on every forearm and cheek, the acrid scent of effort hanging heavy, but the mood was casual, almost playful. The record for the obstacle course, 3 years unbeaten, was posted proudly on a plaque at the side of the deck, a silent testament to countless hours of pain, grit, and stubborn pride. Every SEAL here knew it. Every SEAL believed it untouchable. And yet, the chatter about who would finally break it filled the corners of the room like nervous static. Then she appeared, not with a shout or a showy entrance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged somewhere entirely different than this kind of attention. She stepped from the shadowed edge of the deck, her frame deceptively slight against the hulking athletes around her. She carried no extra gear, no over-the-top display of readiness. Just herself, and a calm, unflinching gaze. "Would you mind if I tried?" Her voice cut through the background noise like a scalpel, precise and measured. A ripple of laughter rolled across the half-circle of SEALs. One of them, a tall man with a jaw like a chiseled block of granite, snorted and leaned back on his heels. You're kidding, right?" Another chuckled, clapping a hand on the first man's shoulder. "Yeah, go ahead, champ. Let's see what happens." The officer in charge raised a brow, suppressing a smirk. "Stopwatch is yours," he said, half amused, half curious. The handoff was casual, almost dismissive, but the weight of that small gesture hung between them. She took the stopwatch with both hands, gave a polite nod, and set it aside. She didn't look at the group, didn't need their approval. Her eyes scanned the course with the intensity of someone reading a puzzle only she could solve. The whistle blew. She moved. At first, it looked almost like a dance. Rope climb. Her hands gripped the fibers as if she were meant to be there, pulling herself up with fluid precision while her legs locked in perfect angles against the wall. Each movement seemed premeditated yet effortless, a mix of raw strength and razor-sharp technique. The laughter from before faded into murmurs, as though the spectators were realizing that maybe this wasn't a joke. Over the wall she went, landing without a grunt, feet planted perfectly. The sled section came next, and she seized the weights like extensions of her own limbs. Muscles bulged, heart pounded, but she moved with controlled rhythm, each motion efficient and purposeful. One of the SEALs muttered under his breath, incredulous. How is she doing that? The course seemed to resist her at every turn, but she met every challenge with relentless precision. Monkey bars. Hands raw, skin white and blistered, she swung with perfect timing. Balance beams and narrow planks seemed to straighten under her feet as though the deck itself acknowledged her skill. There was no hesitation, no wasted effort. Even the instructors paused, pens hovering over clipboards, eyes widening. Time slowed for the watching SEALs. The noise of the deck, the clanging, the shouting, the grunt of exertion, faded to the background. All that existed was her. The determination set in the lines of her jaw, the fire in her eyes, the way she inhaled and exhaled as though she were drawing the course into herself. Every push-up, every vault, every swing of the rope was a message. The record wasn't sacred. It was waiting to be taken. When she reached the final obstacle, the last stretch of sandbags and weighted ladders, the sweat stinging her eyes and the burn in her limbs screaming for relief, she didn't falter. She surged forward with a controlled ferocity, hands gripping the ladder rungs, legs propelling her upward, and slammed the finish pad with a final exhale that was almost a roar, though it wasn't for them. It was for her, for the challenge, for the record itself. The stopwatch beeped. One glance at the numbers, and a stunned silence fell over the deck. 1 second passed, then another. Whistles, mutters, incredulous glances darted around the circle. The plaque on the wall, the unbroken record, shattered in less than 10 minutes. She stood there, chest heaving, sweat and dust streaked across her face and forearms, scanning the faces around her. No smugness, no arrogance. Just a quiet acknowledgement, a small nod, as if to say, "I've done my part. Now it's yours to catch up." The SEALs stared, caught somewhere between admiration, disbelief, and a dawning respect that would take weeks to process. History had been made, and it had happened quietly, ruthlessly, in front of their very eyes. The air on the training deck felt heavier now, charged with a strange mix of disbelief and cautious anticipation. The SEALs who had laughed earlier now leaned forward slightly, eyes wide, brows furrowed, trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed. None of them had expected her to even get past the first rope climb, let alone annihilate the record with such fluidity. They exchanged glances, uncertain whether to speak or stay silent, as if the rules of this world had been subtly rewritten in front of them. She didn't give them a chance to recover. Without hesitation, she moved to the next segment of the course, the tire run and weighted carries. Every step she took seemed deliberate, yet unnaturally swift, like she was dancing with physics itself. Tires flipped and bounced under her precise strikes. The weights she carried, far heavier than anything the SEALs would normally consider reasonable, didn't slow her stride. Her arms flexed with effortless control, and the rhythmic pounding of her boots became a hypnotic beat, punctuating the silence she had imposed on the group. A young recruit muttered something under his breath, but quickly swallowed it when the officer shot him a warning glance. The words didn't matter anyway. The action on the deck spoke louder than anything they could vocalize. Every obstacle seemed designed to expose weakness, but she turned them into extensions of herself. Wall climbs that had humbled veterans for months, rope swings that had tested the limits of coordination and strength, she handled them all like second nature. The SEALs' laughter, once so confident, had completely vanished. A tense quiet settled, broken only by the metallic clangs of equipment and the thud of her boots striking the padded floor. One of the seasoned operators, a man who had held multiple records himself, crossed his arms and tilted his head, watching closely. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, a mix of respect, envy, and disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. The record was unbreakable, yet here she was, rewriting every rule they had been drilled to uphold. The rope swing over the pit was next, and it was arguably the trickiest segment. The air above the pit smelled of sweat and dust, tension crackling like electricity. Her hands gripped the rope as though it were part of her skeleton, swinging with perfect momentum, legs tucked and released at exactly the right moment. Time seemed to stretch in slow motion for the observers. They could see the calculation behind every movement, the instinctual perfection that defied years of their own painstaking practice. She landed lightly on the far side, almost silently, and pivoted immediately into the weighted ladder climb. Her arms shook slightly under the strain, but her motion never faltered. Each rung was a beat in her relentless rhythm. Her breathing remained controlled, a soft exhale that contrasted sharply with the harsh gasps of anyone else who might have attempted this. Even the instructor, clipboard in hand, couldn't help but shake his head, muttering under his breath, "I've never seen anything like this." The SEALs' faces shifted from disbelief to awe. Some straightened instinctively, as if their bodies recognized mastery even before their minds could process it. Others fidgeted, unable to look away, their previous bravado replaced with something almost reverent. She wasn't just fast, she was flawless. Every motion had a purpose, every second a calculated effort, and yet it all appeared natural, almost effortless. Then came the final segment before the finish line, the weighted sprints and the vaults. This portion was notorious for breaking even the most disciplined operators. Muscles would tremble, lungs would burn, and minds would falter under exhaustion. But she attacked it with the same methodical precision, vaulting over obstacles as though they were shadows, gripping weights and propelling herself forward with relentless energy. The stopwatch continued its unforgiving tick, each beep a reminder that history was being rewritten in real time. By the time she neared the last stretch, the SEALs had collectively stopped questioning whether the record could fall. They had seen it with their own eyes. They were watching history unfold, and it was impossible to look away. Every fiber of the training deck seemed to bend to her will, each obstacle succumbing to the perfect storm of strength, speed, and determination she embodied. She hit the final ramp and sprinted toward the finish, every muscle screaming, sweat and dust streaking her body like battle paint. In that moment, the SEALs' admiration became tangible. It wasn't just respect. They were witnessing a force that transcended expectation, someone who redefined what was humanly possible in their world. And with that, she crossed the final marker, every step a statement, every breath a testament. Nothing in that deck, or in their assumptions, would ever be the same again. The finish line approached, and the atmosphere on the deck had completely shifted. Where there had once been laughter and scoffing, now there was silence, tense, charged, almost reverent. The SEALs who had mocked her only moments ago now watched with wide eyes, unable to look away as she stormed down the final stretch. Her chest heaved with exertion, muscles trembling but controlled, sweat streaking her face in sharp lines that caught the overhead lights. Every fiber of her body screamed exhaustion, yet she pushed harder, moving faster than anyone had thought possible. The weighted sleds rattled behind her, tires bounced, ropes swung, but she moved like a force of nature. Each step toward the finish pad carried not just the weight of the obstacles she had conquered, but the collective disbelief of the men who had trained for years to hold this record. They had memorized the course, strategized every move, believed in the sacredness of their unbeaten numbers, but now they were watching all their assumptions crumble under the precision of her unstoppable rhythm. She hit the final hurdle, vaulted over it with perfect timing, and slammed her hands onto the finish pad. The stopwatch beeped, echoing through the deck like a gunshot in slow motion. A second passed, then another, and another. When the officer finally glanced at the time, his jaw went slack. Impossible, he muttered under his breath, though the numbers on the stopwatch made it very clear. She hadn't just broken the record, she had obliterated it. The SEALs around him froze, disbelief etched into every line of their faces. Some rubbed their eyes, convinced they had misread the display. Others simply stood still, hearts pounding, trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed with everything they had been taught about limits and strength. She didn't celebrate. There was no fist pump, no triumphant smile. She simply stood, chest heaving, sweat dripping from her brow, scanning the deck with a calm, almost unreadable expression. Her gaze met the officer's briefly, a small, almost imperceptible nod, like she was saying, "This is done. Your turn to catch up." Then she stepped back, giving the room space to recover from the shock she had delivered. One of the older SEALs finally found his voice, a low, gravelly sound. I've never seen anyone move like that. Not in my life." His tone carried awe and a hint of something else, admiration mixed with the reluctant acceptance that they had just witnessed a masterclass. The younger recruits whispered among themselves, their previous arrogance evaporating in the face of undeniable talent. She made it look easy," one muttered. Another shook his head, eyes wide. "How is that even human?" The officer finally cleared his throat, straightening his posture as if the weight of tradition had just been overturned. "Everyone take note," he said, his voice steady but charged with excitement. "That is how the impossible becomes possible. Let this be the benchmark. Remember her technique, remember her discipline, and remember that we are never above learning, from anyone." The room buzzed now, but it was different from before. There was no laughter, no ridicule. It was electric with respect, a quiet acknowledgement that a new standard had been set. The plaque on the wall might have held a record, but now, in real time, history had been rewritten. The SEALs exchanged glances, nodding to one another. They had seen a master at work, someone who had pushed the limits of skill, strength, and willpower farther than any of them thought possible. She finally stepped away from the finish line, brushing sweat and dust from her arms, and the SEALs instinctively gave her space, a silent tribute to what they had just witnessed. Even the officer allowed a faint smile, recognizing that the day had changed them all. The deck returned to life slowly, equipment rattling, boots moving, but the energy was different now. Something had shifted. Disbelief had become respect, laughter replaced with quiet admiration, and for everyone there, the impossible now seemed like a challenge rather than an obstacle. And as the camera would pan away from her poised stance at the finish line, the subtle, unspoken message lingered: greatness isn't defined by the expectations of others. It's defined by the courage to try, the discipline to execute, and the refusal to be limited by doubt. If you've enjoyed witnessing this unstoppable journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't miss out on more stories of grit, determination, and triumph against all odds.